The year is 1931. The Japanese have just taken over Manchuria, China, and have began their occupation. And they decided to build one of the largest bioweapon facilities ever created. The location they had chosen for this facility was done on purpose. It was to keep it away from the Japanese mainland. But why would they do this? Well, it's simple: human experimentation. In reality, this bioweapon facility was more of a prison, with cells in over 12 buildings in a 2-square-mile area, making it hard to bomb and hard to raid. They had hired 3,000 staff members, with some being a part of a youth division. And they were separated into their own research and experimentations. These experiments ranged from testing chemicals, live surgery, replacing limbs on the wrong side, and putting horse blood into people. This is barely half of the atrocities committed at Unit 731. The unit was led by Shiro Ishio and Hisato Yoshimura as an army engineer. And in 1936, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito officially allowed the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of Kwantung Army, otherwise known as Unit 731.
What's on your mind, dreamers?
Zongma Fortress was a camp that held the standard criminals, anti-Japanese supporters, and any people put under false charges. They were well fed in order to preserve the body before they would starve them and commit a vivisection, which is a surgery on a live person. And some of these people were even infected with the bubonic plague before being treated on, in quotes. And after a large-scale prison break, which jeopardized the location, they moved locations to Pingfang, which was 15 miles south, where they set up a way larger facility that was the main area. The experiments were held on prisoners against the Japanese, which were mostly Chinese civilians, Chinese soldiers, and Russian equivalents. These experiments were vulgar and crude, with some involving starvation after damage to the body, surgery on an awake person, infection and death rate, and putting them in a pressure chamber until their eyes exploded. And this is a quote about a guard trying to find a proper subject. They would order the guards to find them a useful sample. A prisoner would be taken from his cell. Guard would hold him while the other would smash the victim's head open with an axe. This was just one of the ways that they would find people to experiment on. And another quote from Nakagawa Yonizo, who watched footage from these experiments, said this: "Some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of medicine. There is such a thing as professional curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing and studying beheadings? None at all." This was the true brutality of the unit. All of this was done in an almost playful manner, and when it was serious, it led to severe negatives, such as the use of fleas, who were infected with the plague and more, which were then dropped on Chinese cities, which is claimed to have killed hundreds of thousands of people. They used weapons such as anthrax, typhoid, paratyphoid, and they would drop it onto these cities with infected fleas and rats from aircraft. And supposedly, these facilities could make upwards of 300 kilograms of the plague and 100,000 kilograms of chlorea a day. But this led to issues of the disease mass spreading between the faculty. And after the fleas and rats, they moved on to food, where they would give prisoners infected apples with typhoid and the bubonic plague. And this was later to be concluded to be ineffective. They also deemed that biobombs were also ineffective. The way that they believed was the best way of spreading diseases was the fleas and the rats and spreading it directly through the air with purifiers. This led to Operation PX in 1944. The Japanese wanted to hit all the major cities of California via a submersible bio attack. They would use the plague, chlorea, and typhus as a terror attack against US civilians. And it was fully ready. They were ready to do this attack before it was shelved by a general of staff who claimed that it would have started a full-scale bio-war between the world and Japan. This would cause backlash, and we were days away from a California bio attack in 1944. The doctors, if that's truly what you want to call them, were the worst part of this prison. They would call the prisoners logs, as reference to how many logs have they fell, which is a way of joking and dehumanizing each one of the prisoners. These prisoners had to go through vivisections, which were live surgeries, where the doctors would conduct experiments such as removing the esophagus and reach it to the intestines, and would remove random organs and limbs to study blood loss, in quotes. But in later interviews, the doctors would say this was used as a form of practice for the lower levels. These doctors would also do horrendous acts to the prisoners. Multiple sexual crimes were committed throughout the history, and reminder, these patients were infected with some of the worst diseases known to man. It's so bad I can't read off the quote to you guys because of YouTube. And I'm going to really emphasize the absolute awful experiments they would force prisoners with STDs to spread it forcefully, and there were even kids who grew up inside of Unit 731 with syphilis, and that the guards would call the syphilis subjects jam-filled buns. They would also force pregnancies to see if diseases could transmit through birth, but most of these kids were either killed afterwards or aborted before birth. The worst doctor of all of them was Hisato, as mentioned earlier. He would commit these tests of the body's resistance to the cold, where he would force someone to get frostbite, then chip the ice pieces off before cutting the limb off entirely. He even did this to an infant, a 3-day-old infant. They referred to him as a cold-blooded animal, and one of the other doctors who was interviewed said that there was a time where he put 2 naked men in a cage at -50 degrees while recording and waited till they both died, and there was a point to where they dug each other's nails into each other, reaching for heat. In total, he used 20 kids and a 3-day-old infant. And if you were a doctor or a guard, you were not safe from these experiments. Either if you caught the plague or any sort of the disease from these experiments, you would later be dissected for the research. There were even times where they would put prisoners out on stakes and drop bombs, throw grenades at them, behead them, and afterwards they would try to help them and revive them, which upwards of 90% of the time led to the death of the prisoner. They would even do field testings with various outfits in situations like artillery into trenches, and they would do this for days at a time, checking on the prisoner every day, seeing how they were in their situation. And over the course of these trials, they would shoot 4,800 artillery shells and would document every single one. And after most of these experiments, they would preserve all the body parts, with one of these people involved with the youth division claiming that there were closets filled with body parts, and even, supposedly, a man split in half vertically. There were breakout attempts, and of right now, there are only 2 that are known of. The first one involved prisoners getting a key and letting out over 100 people from their cells, but after leaving, found they were all still trapped in the main courtyard, where after the scientists and guards figured this out, and deciding not to shoot them, they released pesticides, which at the time were considered harmless, and it ended up killing all 100 in the yard. The second attempt involved 2 Russians and a few escapees, where after fleeing, they realized one issue. Escape was nearly impossible. The facility itself had well over 1,500 staff members, 300 guards, and massive walls which were almost 10 feet tall, and a set of electrical wire put in a ditch past that, making leaving in this condition virtually impossible. The aftermath. After all of this happened and the Axis lost World War II, they tried to hide their backs, leading to the almost destruction of the entire building, claiming that some of it was too sturdy to be destroyed, and the destruction of almost all the evidence, and even told the doctors to take the secret to the grave. And most of them ended up doing exactly that. And after that, they murdered every prisoner by either throwing them a rope and telling them to kill themselves, which nearly 25% did, or using poison and lethal syringes. After this, they were all cremated and buried on the site, and to this day, there are 0 documented survivors. They took everything, every disease, every document, and every life they stole along the way. And during the trials against the Germans in the US, the doctors involved in these crimes at 731 were all granted immunity in the States, with only 1 or 2 being persecuted 10 to 15 years for harming a US pilot. And they did this by feeding info into the US with the documents that they didn't burn. And this granted immunity to almost every doctor involved. And the US scientists even deemed half of the info just useless due to how crude and vulgar it was. And so all of these doctors were never pleaded guilty for what they did. But most of them in the late 80s did do interviews in a couple of documentaries and held accountability for these crimes. Hello, y'all. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you, and it means a lot that you just watched it all the way through, and it would be really appreciative if you could, like and subscribe. Oh, shameless plug.